How far would you go to get early Led Zeppelin tones? Hey everyone, I'm Jack Fossett. Welcome to the channel. Today we are going to talk about early Led Zeppelin tones, and we're going to simultaneously do a demo and review of the Supro Black Magick, which is based on the old modified Supro Coronado that Jimmy Page famously used on Led Zeppelin 1. Now, if you don't know that story, the long and short of it is that before he used his big Marshall stacks, like many of us picture, and his Gibson Les Paul with Led Zeppelin Live, in the studio, he was using a Fender Telecaster and a small Supro amp. Now again, that was a Supro Coronado, but it was actually modified. He had had the amp from the early 1960s when he was touring with Neil Christian and the Crusaders, and at some point it suffered damage and was repaired. Now, in its repair, it was outfitted with a 112-inch speaker as opposed to the original two 10-inch speakers, and there were also some component modifications. Now, they may not have necessarily been to change the sound of the amp so much as Supros were made by Valco in the United States, he was in England, and as is the story with many of the amplifiers in England, sometimes they were just kind of trying to use components that they had available to them, like the famous story of Jim Marshall making the JTM amp and really very much copying the Fender Bassman, but then using the components and parts that he had available to him. However, this made for a unique Supro amp, which Page, again, used in the studio when they did Led Zeppelin 1 for the tones that kicked off, arguably, the greatest rock band of all time. What I have always found interesting about it, and this actually goes to Page altogether throughout his career, is it's sort of lighter gain than you expect. And maybe it's a contextual thing. But when you think of the weight of Led Zeppelin, when you think of the massive riffs that they did, of the huge stadiums that they sold out, just the whole air around the band of Viking legends and Valhalla and all this and that and that and this, you sort of automatically assume it's going to be like, well, it's a, this heavy guitar sound. And when you listen to it, it's surprisingly not. It's actually kind of a mid-level gain tone that has just some really nice tonal characteristics, nice mid-range. There was this ethereal thing, not in like not ambient ethereal, but there was this depth to the tone, which of course also has a lot to do with his playing. But particularly in the early days, it's important to remember that it was not this massive stack or anything that he was cranking and getting crazy amounts of gain and drive. It was a Telecaster into a Supro, which is also true later on, even though he started using a lot of different things. But the solo to Stairway to Heaven was also a Telecaster and a Supro. Now, it's possible that that one was a Supro Thunderbolt, not the same modified Coronado. As I have said before, and I will say again, it's amazing that there were no engineers who had the foresight to think that 60, 70 years in the future, we'd all have a bunch of baby televisions in our pockets unlocking the secrets of the world, and that we would argue about all the gear that they used. Now, again, Page also most likely used a number of other amps. There's some reports that said he used Voxes at times, and we all know that he used Marshalls. In some of the early Led Zeppelin tours, he used Hi-Watts as well. So there's just a whole lot of love. There's a whole lot of things that go into the Page tone, as well as pedals and using his echoes and all kinds of different things. But when you want to lock down kind of a sound and you want to just have a good starting point, it does help to kind of try and get into the gear that they used. Now, it's important to mention a little historical context here too, and why this tone, this album, and this amplifier were so important historically speaking. Now, when you think about Led Zeppelin, which came out in 1969, you have to think that that's really just a few years, since the Beatles played on Ed Sullivan. That's an insane amount of musical evolution in that relatively short amount of time. Now, Supro, which were made by Velco, which put out a lot of different amps under a lot of different names, were over here and were used for a lot of blues and guitar players playing early forms of rock and roll, perhaps some jazz and things too. Velco also went out of business in 1968. So when Led Zeppelin 1 comes out and it makes the splash that it does, and over time, people find out that Page used this amplifier that's not even available anymore, and a lot of people didn't really know what it was. Was it this unicorn amplifier? Did it have some kind of extra, mojo juice that was going on with it? There wasn't the same access to the knowledge, certainly, that we have nowadays. The legend grew, the myth around it grew, and that really also led into pictures of what the Supro sound is, which maybe it's fair, maybe it's not fair, but certainly when people think Supro, a lot of people immediately jump to Led Zeppelin 1. Now, this new Supro has been around for about 10 years, and so of course, with this being one of the cornerstones of what people think of as the Supro sound, they did put out this amplifier. Now, there's two versions of it. This is the Black Magick. They also make the Black Magick Reverb. This is the straight-up Black Magick. Now, I really wanted to do this video, and I want to thank Supro for sponsoring this. They're helping me out to do this video. But I approached them to do it. One of the reasons is because I have, at times, had the opportunity to play through someone else's Black Magick Reverb, which I had originally wanted to do the video with. That one didn't work out for the video, but some of you who have seen my channel know that I've actually used this amp. If you've seen some of my YouTube shorts or Instagram reels and things, you might have actually heard me play through the Black Magick Reverb. And I really love the amp, and I've just grown to love it kind of more and more over time. This one, I wanted to go with the straight-up Black Magick because the original amp that Page used would not have had reverb, and I wanted to get one kind of as close to what he had as possible. This specific amp uses some unique tubes. It has 6973 tubes. Now, this one has a Jensen P12Q Alnico speaker, and it has actually two separate channels. You can do one going into the other, and then you can do the other on its own, and it's got volumes and tones for each, and tube-driven tremolo. And what caught me about this is, can it do the Page thing? Yeah, it can definitely do the Page thing. And I am theming this video kind of in the tribute to Jimmy Page. And because believe it or not, even though, my playing style and my music doesn't necessarily sound anything like Led Zeppelin, he was a huge influence of me. I still consider him one of the great pillars of rock guitar, and he has tones that I just find incredibly inspiring. So you always like to have that little bit of a connection to the people who inspired you to play in the first place. So I am going to theme this video kind of in that sense with both the style that I'm going for and some of the pedals that I'm using, which I'll talk about in a second. But one of the important things to remember, and one of the things that I grew to know when I was using the Black Magick Reverb that I was using before, and now this Black Magick, is it's really as much just a classic, rich, organic tube amp. I don't mean to say that in a generic way, but when you think of just a great, relatively small classic rock tube amp that you just plug in and turn on, this is it. It just sounds great. It's got that great mid-range. It still has some nice articulation. It breaks up in a nice way at a number of different levels, right? You get just a little bit of breakup early if you play some hard rhythm. It is not insanely loud. It's actually manageable when you crank it. I wasn't at all hurting when I was sitting here in the room cranking it and getting some of those cool tones. It's inspiring to play. It makes your guitar sound like your guitar should sound. And with the two different channels, you have some different kind of, little responsiveness things that you can play around with. Of course, you get more gain in the first one. And the styling is phenomenal. And like the rest of the amp, it is directly inspired by that original Jimmy Page modified Coronado. So what I am going to do now is just give you a bunch of different tones, again, inspired by Page, a cacophony of tones, if you will. And I'm going to do a combination of cranking the amp, which you heard in the intro jam. I had the Les Paul going into the 1 and 2 channel, and then I had the Telecaster going into the 2 channel. And I'm using a number of pedals here. I am going to use a Fulltone Soul Bender. I'm going to use a Vick Audio Overdriver, which is inspired by the famous Color Sound, and I'm going to use a Keeley Eccos at various different things and to kind of get you different tones. I was also using the Vick Audio Overdriver with the Telecaster at the beginning. Now, I'm not going for any historical accuracy regarding Jimmy Page tones. I'm just kind of showing you how this can be a great starting point for not only Page tones, but again, just some great classic rock tones that make your guitar sound like your guitar should sound. So let us know, what do you think about all this? What other interesting historical tidbits? This was just kind of a brief overview of some of the Jimmy Page story and the Supro story with it. If you have any other tidbits you want to add in the comments, please do so. Do you have the Black Magick or the Black Magick Reverb? What artists inspire you in a way that you kind of want to stay connected to them? Maybe not necessarily copy them exactly, but like, who's inspired by gear would you play? Let us know in the comments. I'm Jack Fossett. Stick around for some more tone. Hey, if you want to support the channel, you can find a link to where you can get this amplifier below. It's an affiliate link. If you do any shopping through that link, that directly supports the channel while you're getting cool gear at the same time. You will also find a tip jar below. You will find a link to gear recommendations where I give you all my gear recommendations for everything. Acoustic guitars, electric guitars, pedals, amplifiers, even some extra stuff. All those are affiliate links, so if you do any shopping through those, that helps the channel. And hey, you can download some music, It's okay. People still download music. I still download music. Thanks for watching. Stick around for some more tone. I'm Jack Fossett. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the video.